Welcome back, everybody. Brukim Habayim. It seems like a long time since we've been together, although it hasn't been that long, just a few weeks. But what we've been through together over the past few weeks has really been astounding. I hope the Hagim were sweet and meaningful for you and your families wherever you found yourself. And here we are with a new year of study together, and I'm so glad that we can all be together. And thank you for being here today. We are continuing our deep dive into Sefer Bemidbar, which we've been doing for over a year. And I was looking at past recordings. We've done 41 sessions on the Book of Numbers since we started doing this. And we're about halfway through the book. So thank you for continuing this journey with me. I'm very grateful to each and every one of you for your um, participation and your encouragement. Let's jump in on this amazing passage. We are beginning with Numbers chapter 22. I'll put it up on the screen in a moment. And with Numbers chapter 22, we start an incredible unit, one of my favorites, and I know a lot of other people's favorites as well, a favorite unit of not just the book of Numbers, but the entire Torah itself. This is the story of Bilam and Balak. It's going to take us a few weeks to go through. It's chapters 22, 23, and 24 of the book of Numbers. And so much of Numbers is given to, of course, the setting is the stories of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness between Egypt and the arrival in the Promised Land. And we've experienced some of the recurring themes of miracles in the wilderness to keep them alive, the grumbling of the Israelites and complaining against Moses and Aaron and Miriam and God, the subsequent punishments for those grumblings, including punishment against the leaders, Moses, Aaron, Miriam, confrontation with various enemies, some that seem real and some that seem drawn from myth and legend. And into the midst of all of this, we get this fantastic saga, 3 chapters that the Talmud actually calls the Book of Bilam, as if once upon a time it were a separate and distinct book unto itself. I'm going to put Numbers chapter 22 up on the screen, and we'll get a sense of the material once again. And we'll just read the introduction to the story. The most famous parts of the story are going to be reserved for the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. But here's the setting. Through all the wanderings that Israel has been through and all the dramatic encounters, including our most recent discussions, some battles against local enemies, King Sihon and King Og, um, who was more mythic than real, according to the legends that we read. We have this little short story inserted into the midst of the book. And here it goes. The story of King Balak of Moab, who hired a foreign prophet to curse the Israelites as they were coming adjacent to his territory in the desert. I'd like to read the first chunk of material, maybe Numbers chapter 22, verses 1 through 20, which will set the stage for this conflict that's going to unfold with more and more drama and more wonder over the next few chapters. A volunteer who would like to read for us today? Susan, great. You're a storyteller, and this is a good story. Um, so take us from the top. You'll notice that the verse 1 is a little bit of a epilogue to what came before and simultaneously a prologue for what it's the bridge between the past and what's coming. And then we'll read maybe through the first unit of the story that I've marked off on the page. Susan, take it away.
The Israelites then marched on and encamped at the steppes of Moab, across the Jordan from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field." Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, in Petor, which is by the Euphrates, in the land of his kinfolk, to invite him, saying, there is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed indeed, and he whom you curse is cursed. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, spend the night here, and I will reply to you as God may instruct me. So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and said, what do these people want of you? Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came out from Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps can engage them in battle and drive them off. But God said to Balaam, do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed. Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, go back to your own country, for God will not let me go with you. The Moabite dignitaries left, and they came to Balak and said, Balaam refused to come with us. Then Balak sent other dignitaries, more numerous and distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said to him, thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not refuse to come to me. I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and damn this people for me. Balaam replied to Balak's officials, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, big or little, contrary to the command of God. So you too stay here overnight and let me find out what else God may say to me. That night, God came to Balaam and said to him, if these men have come to invite you, you may go with them. But whatever I command you, that you shall do.
Okay, let's stop there. That material will occupy us this week and next week, I think. Um,
Phew.
before we get to maybe the more famous parts of the story. So what happens? You know, here inserted into Numbers, we have this unusual story. I mean, this that you can tell just from the flavor of the material itself. It feels so different than the other sorts of material that we've been engaging with all of this time. There are so many unusual things about this passage, and let's talk about them a little bit. That first of all, for 3 chapters, one entire weekly parsha in Jewish tradition, there is who's missing. There is no action or deed or even reference to Moses or any other Israelite. All of the protagonists, all of the actors in this entire story are foreigners, non-Israelites. That's kind of remarkable. We might even wonder, do as the story unfolds, do Moses and the Israelites even know that any of this took place? In fact, the story kind of hinges on the idea that they don't know, that they're completely oblivious to everything that you and I are reading about Balak and this foreign prophet Bilam. The overall message seems to be that somehow God is looking out for Israel's well-being, even when they're completely oblivious to it. Of course, there's more to come, and the most famous and memorable element of the story is the talking donkey that Bilam rides on his way to his encounter with Israel. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks' time. And then there's this mixture of prose and poetry that's going to come, because I don't mean to spoil the story for you, except that I presume most of us know ultimately the big outlines of this story is that Bilam, this famous foreign prophet, hired to come and curse Israel, but when he opens his mouth, all that can come out are words of blessing, despite his intentions otherwise. All of these details make the story unusual, but there's even more to it. And I see your hands, but I'm going to talk for a minute or two just to set the scene a little bit, and then I'll call on everybody. Um, at the top of the source sheet, I added one or two things that just make this passage so wonderfully weird and unusual. Jacob Milgrom, the great 20th century Bible scholar, um, says this: rabbinic tradition calls these chapters the section of Bilam, a designation that accords with the view that the Torah was compiled from disparate scrolls. But here's the point. Clearly, the rabbis believed that the Bilam story was composed independently and later inserted into the Torah text itself. That's a pretty audacious comment to make. We don't have manuscripts of the book of Numbers without this story. And for that matter, we don't have this story written on separate scrolls or separate manuscripts. But still, there's a consensus among scholars that this came from another place. Even the Talmud has a reference to the Sefer Bilam, this book of Bilam, as if it's a separate thing. For all of our lives, we've been saying the five books of Moses. Maybe we should be saying the six books, because there's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and three chapters of Bilam, which are a separate and distinct book all by themselves. I mean, people look at you weird if you refer to the six books of the Torah, but there is this idea in the Talmud that this is a book distinct unto itself, which is kind of remarkable in its own right. Now, I want to say one other thing. I want to take about 3 or 4 minutes to talk a little bit about scholarship and archaeology, because I think it's relevant to this introduction about what makes this passage so fantastically weird and distinct from the rest of the material around it. Um, and this has to do with an archaeological discovery in the 1960s in Jordan, in a place called Deir Allah. It's actually, I have it on a map, which I'll share for you in a minute. Um, this is a site. Where did my map go? I got a lot of windows open to share with you. Here's a biblical map. It's not a great map, but it's going to show us the site of where all this is happening. All this is happening. Here's a map of the events of the book of Numbers. And the description that we've heard is that Israel is camping on the other side of the Jordan River. Here's the Dead Sea, and here's the Jordan River, adjacent to Jericho. So we're talking geographically about this region on the east bank of the Jordan River. Here's the nation of Moab. The last stories that we read in the previous chapter take place in these sites up here. So we're on like the northern boundary of the kingdom of Moab, and these are the bad guys of this story who are watching all the events unfold. So picture this. We're in this area. This is geographically, here's the Jordan River again. This is geographically where the story is unfolding. Now, more or less in this part of the world in the 1960s, an archaeological site was uncovered at Der Allah, which is up here, very close to the Jabbok River. Do you see this on the northern tip of this map? The Jabbok River, which in Arabic is called the Zerka River, it's a tributary from the Jordan, is very significant in biblical tales. What happened at the Jabbok? In Genesis, that's the place where Jacob wrestles with the angel all night. And he wrestles with the angel, and the angel won't let him go until the angel says, no longer will your name be Jacob, but your name will be Yisrael. That's a really important story. And that takes place in the same neighborhood of what we're talking about here. Just about a mile away from that spot on the Jabbok River, an archaeological site was excavated in 1967. And the excitement around that site was because there were certain inscriptions found on the wall of a shrine there. It was not Israelite, which means it wasn't Jewish, but it was a foreign temple in this spot. And the inscriptions on the wall, here it comes, the inscriptions on the wall told a story. And as that story was uncovered and deciphered, it was discovered that there was a reference to a seer named Bilam, the son of Beor. This is the sort of thing that people, biblical scholars, get very excited about, and archaeologists get very excited about, because this means is an outside reference to a figure who appears in the Torah. But it's not citing the Torah. In fact, it's in a completely different context. On the text, this inscription on the wall, it tells a story. I'm not going to necessarily read the story today. It's not super relevant to us. But the point is, there's a story about a character whose name was Bilam, the son of Beor, a divine seer. Tells an elaborate story about him in this polytheistic world rescuing a goddess from the clutches of these um, kind of savage male gods, and he rescues her through that. Um, the story itself is neat, but not totally relevant to us today. What's relevant to us is this, that we have a story, a character that's also found in the Torah, but in a completely different context with a completely different sort of story around him. In other words, Bilam was, in the ancient world, a well-known literary figure. What we have in the Torah is a story about him, but apparently 3,000 years ago, they passed around stories about Bilam, just like King Og, who we talked about the last time we were together back at the end of August. These were mythic figures that the ancients in that part of the world, not just the Israelites, told stories about. And the stories didn't necessarily originate in the Torah. He wasn't exclusive to Israelite literature. And among other things, this shows us that the lines of the cultural and social and national, those boundaries, they were more fluid than we care to think. There was a mythological prophet named Balaam who apparently was very powerful and had a direct line to God or the gods, and the ancients told stories about him. We've got one preserved here in the Torah. There's actually a couple of other places in the Bible where his name is mentioned, and kind of the assumption is you ancient readers, you know who we're talking about because there's lots of stories about the prophet Balaam. I think that stuff is worth getting excited about. And I think it kind of sets this stage a little bit also for this story that has so many kind of mythical elements to it. Well, if that's the vibe you're getting or reading it, this sense of mythology, yeah, that fits because he was this mythic character that ancient civilizations passed around from one story to another. That sets the stage for this wondrous story about Bilam riding on his talking donkey on this mission to go curse the Israelites. But he's going to fail because he's become an instrument of God instead, who can only speak words of blessing. Here endeth the introduction. Thanks for your patience, and let's call on a couple people to respond to these opening passages. Susan, start us off.
There were two things I noticed this time. One is this story, even this part, this is very long and elaborate.
Yeah.
Um,
Three
for
whole chapters of Torah devoted to it. Yeah.
well, it's also the way it's written. I mean, even this part is there's a lot of it's not really repetitious because different things are happening, but if I compare this style to say the Akedah, it's like we have all these details that we're not used to. Um, and the other thing I noticed is that sadly, some of what Balak is saying just sounds so familiar. It's
Yeah.
like we've
Well, that's stuff that we do want to talk about today, for sure. Thanks, Susan. Rebecca.
All right. Am I coming through? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Just want to make sure because there's been some tech difficulties. Um, so getting ahead a little, but I remember being told at one point that what what Bilam does say when he tries to curse the Israelites, the Matovu Ohalecha. Um, I remember being told at one point that it was the only part of the Jewish liturgy originally spoken by a non-Jew. And that makes sense because Balaam is, Moabite and he's one of these non-Israelites. But so I found it interesting that he is talking about Adonai, my God, using the Tetragrammaton. Um, and I'm wondering why, uh, are we supposed to think that he does worship the Jewish God, or why are we supposed to think that it is told that way, with him specifically getting his prophecies from Adonai?
Yeah, I'm not going to address all your observations right now because those are some of the big questions that we're going to want to discuss as we zoom in on the passage on a closer level. But you're right. To ask all these wonderful questions is also to point out some of the real idiosyncrasies of this unit, which is part of what makes it so wonderful, I think. So we'll come back to all those things that you put on the table, Rebecca. If not today, then in the weeks to come also. Andy.
Hi, I think there's something that Balak said at the beginning that's very telling about his attitude.
Hmm.
But first, I wanted to quickly mention that not only does the story of Balaam seem like a separate book, but it's actually isolated in a separate parsha.
Yep.
And besides Korach, Balaam is the only story that's nicely beginning and end. And there's a few sentences at the end that don't seem related, but the rabbis found a relationship anyway. So, what I wanted to say about Balak is there's something familiar when he said, "Those who you bless are blessed, those you curse." Doesn't that sound like what God said to Abraham? But it's reversed. You see, whereas God was talking about Abraham being blessed, what Balak is saying is that Balaam has a supreme power in the universe. There is no greater power than Balaam, and that's Balak's big mistake.
Excellent. As for your point about Abraham, we're going to come back to that too. Is one place I definitely want us to go today. I'm still just taking these introductory comments, though, and observations about what we've heard. So if your comment or question is very specific about a passage, let's hold on to it until we get to that passage as we read it, because now we're going to read it more closely. That said, Carol?
Um, so it occur as we move through the wilderness, we're told that if we go to through any, or we want to go through any territory to which we're somewhat related, we're supposed to ask permission. We're not just supposed to walk across and fight.
Mm.
And it's interesting that these are the Moabites and Midianites who are asking Balaam to curse the Israelites, because the Moabites come from Lot's family and the Midianites come from Moses's wife. So we are related to both of these, which makes it even more important, I think, and more critical to realize that these are nations to which we are somewhat we can link back, or we are somewhat related to them, and they are the ones who are trying to curse us. It makes it even more important that it's these nations as opposed to the Canaanites or some other group of people who want to get rid of us.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. That's one of the things that makes Genesis like such the great preamble to the entire Torah, and everything comes afterwards, is because Genesis sets up these relationships as well, and reminds us of, like you just said, more concisely and better than I am, Carol, that how they're all connected in this part of the world. Love it. Let's take a look at this text a little bit more closely now and see some of the wonderful things that are going on that are a little bit more subtle. And some of these comments that you've made, Carol, and that Andy made, we're going to come back to as we look at them a little more closely. Let's look closely at the text now. Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. The Amorites, those were the two stories that we read in the previous weeks, the last times we were together, the battle against King Sihon, the battle against King Og. The interesting word to me here is that the first word of the Torah portion is vayar, to see. Balak saw what Israel had done. And this sets up the drama here. This is the direction in which I think Andy was pushing us. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Always when it says somebody sees something in the Torah, We should stop and say, what specifically is it that they saw? Here it says that he saw the battles that Israel waged against the previous two enemies, Sihon and Og, the Amorites. Just hold that onto that for a second because we're going to ask this again. In verse 3, Moab, you notice that Balak was introduced in the first verse. It didn't exactly say who he was or what his relationship was. And then he reappears a paragraph later when it says, "Oh, by the way, Balak ben son of Zippor was the king of Moab at that time." Da, 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 da. So we might ask why he was introduced twice in this story. Hold on to that thought for a minute. Moab was alarmed because the people was so numerous, and Moab, maybe it means the whole people, or maybe it means Balak himself, sort of as a I forgot what the technical literary term for that is, when like the leader is the representative of the entire people. Moab dreaded the Israelites and said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us as an ox licks up the grass from the field." When Susan read it to us, that paragraph made sense. But now, as we look closely at it, there's a lot of interesting anomalies about it. It starts by talking about Balak, but then it says Moab feared. What's the relationship between verse 2 and verse 3? Balak seeing and Moab fearing. You get it? Balak saw this, and then the entire nation was afraid. What's the connection between 2 and 3? The second question I would ask is, what are the Midianites doing here? Midianites are not Moabites. They're another neighboring nation, a little bit further away. Midian is like modern day Saudi Arabia, but they're part of this story too. Balak or the Moabites reach out to their neighbors, the Midianites, and seek out their elders who are going to become part of this plot. What are, why are they significant in this story? And then the third thing I would ask is, what's this weird observation that they make, this weird simile that they're like an ox licking up the grass from the field? What does that mean? So again, the stuff that Susan read so wonderfully now kind of says, wait, it seemed to make sense, but now there's all these weird anomalies in the midst of this story. What can we do about this? Let's start with the question about what was so alarming. Let me take the screen down for a second and put up a source sheet. And let's go to Andy's point. They were alarmed that they were so numerous and they dreaded the Israelites. There's two verbs there, which in translation we have alarmed and dreaded. Andy suggests, oh, you can see the source sheet right now, yes? Okay, good. Let's take a look at some of the commentaries about what it is, this dread that they came from. And Andy suggests that we've heard this before. I think this is what you were alluding to, Andy, right? Exodus chapter 1. In Exodus chapter 1, we all know this story. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let's deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise up from the ground." What, let me put the question to you. And Andy, maybe we'll start with you. What do these two stories have in common with each other? There are some similarities in language here between Pharaoh rallying the Egyptians to enslave the Israelites, and now Balak rallying Moab and the Midianites to do something about the Israelites. What's the connection?
Actually, my comparison is with in Genesis, where God says to Abraham, "You, whoever blesses you will be
Oh,
blessed."
then wait, we have
Yeah,
to come back to that because that's another
yeah.
passage.
But this is interesting
Did
too because it's like people are afraid in this country that immigrants are going to be too many and take over the country. We won't have white people anymore, that kind of thing.
oh Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it sounds like a sort of classic racist trope of these people who are different. And it's not that they're, you can imagine somebody saying, it's not that they're different, but that there's so many of them. You look around and it's like there's not hardly any real Moabites around here anymore. Just classic racist sort of trope. And both of them speak about some connection to the ground. Pharaoh talks about in the event of war, they may rise up from the ground. And Balak spoke about like an ox licking the ground clean of all the vegetation. There's something also casually racist about saying, implying that the other is animal-like. Don't you hear that now? That there's something about them that they're almost unhuman. They're more like animals, the way they breed, the way there's so many of them, the way they come and deplete the land of all its resources. I certainly think that that's some of what's going on in Exodus. Like, you know, we don't do something about this, there will hardly be any real Egyptians around here anymore. And I hear it also in Bilam and Balak in this story. Balak saying, if we don't do something about them, there won't be any real Moabites around here anymore. They're like animals. Um, and that's um, now we can all make the connections for ourselves about like the coarse racism and the violence that it quickly leads to or potentially leads to um, in this story. Okay, that's one connection. My question again is what do they see and make them afraid? Again, there's two verbs. They alarmed and they dreaded the Israelites. What is it that they see and what is it that they're afraid of? Susan.
Well, I agree what you were saying about racism, and also what struck me the first time was, as Tom Lehrer says, everybody hates the Jews. That some of these just feel very familiar, very suspicious. So there's so many, they're going to take over. Oh, they've taken over. Oh, they're running everything. Um, More than just oh, they're going to take all these all the lower jobs. They're going to take over, which is what people think about immigrants, but um, they're going to take over the government, the money, the this, that,
Right.
and it's just. But I don't. I just read this and I think, why? Why would anyone? Why could you even think of this?
Okay. I don't know if the text here talks about why, although there might be a clue. Um, but it does sort of say same as it ever was. Right? And given what we've gone through in recent years, we know this, but it's bigger than just the Jews too. It's classic racist tropes against any group to say they're not like us. They're not even human like us. And if we don't do something, then they're going to what strip the land to its foundations or something like that. We've carried it in our history, but it's also classically bigger than just us as well. That's the point I kind of wanted to make. There's a couple of interesting commentaries on the page. Actually, one maybe is not so interesting. It's kind of obvious. I think Rashi, in a very obvious moment, answers our question by saying, what did Balak see? He thought those two kings that we relied upon, Sihon and Og, couldn't overcome them. How much less we're going to be able to. So Moab was alarmed. In other words, Rashi's answering an interesting question here. Rashi says, well, how come Moab didn't just go fight with the Israelites like in the previous chapter? We saw that Israel had to do battle with a couple of enemy armies. And apparently, Balak was so scared of their numbers and having seen their military victories in the previous chapter that he's got to resort to Plan B. Plan B is kind of supernatural, finding this foreign prophet. So I think that that's what always when you read Rashi, you have to say, what question is Rashi answering? And I think he's saying, why didn't Moab just go and fight? And the answer is because he was afraid He was afraid that they could not overcome him, how much less we'll be able to. That seems kind of clear to me. Rashi's grandson, whose name is the Rashbam, has a different comment that's much less clear to me. He's interested in this second verb, Vaikatz, let me get it right, Vayakots Moab, which is what our translation said, Moab dreaded the Israelites. And the Rashbam here has a very concise but obscure comment. He also connects it to Genesis. I hope you can help me with this. He says this word, Vayakots, is an interesting word. It doesn't really mean dread. It means something comes to an end or enough of something. Um, it's often miketz shnatayim. At the end of 2 years' time, something happens. So it's a little bit of an obscure word. And that brings him to a comment that he knows one other interesting place where this verb appears. Here's what Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam, says. Moab dreaded. Rather, a better translation is, Moab had had enough, b'chayav, with its own life. Compare with what Rebekah said to Isaac back in Genesis. She said, katzti b'chayai, the same verbs, just conjugated a little differently. I'm disgusted with my life, or I've had enough of my life because of these Hittite women that want to marry my son Jacob. If Jacob marries a Hittite woman like these, what good will life be to me? Said Rebekah. So the Rashbam, who usually gives very straightforward commentaries, here is definitely going off into left field somewhere. And I was just hoping that you could help me understand it a little bit. What is he saying? When he says Moab dreaded means that Moab said, we've had enough with our own lives. We're sick of this situation that we live in. And that's what prompts them to go and treat the Israelites as enemies. Does that make sense? It doesn't make total sense to me. That's why I'm putting it out here for you to help me with. Although I do have one place I want to take this idea to. But can anyone, Gershom, maybe can you help us understand that? You know, all of this translation is mine. What the Rashbam said was only 4 words long. He said, B'chayav, kamo katzti b'chayai. That saying, I'm disgusted, I've had enough with the way we've been living, with our lives. What does that have to do with this dread of the Israelites coming through? Gershom, help me out.
I'm sorry, I put my hand up
Oh,
to
no.
comment something else. I can't say that laketsus is a verb that I use particularly, so I may not have the full feel of it. So sorry, I'm not helpful on that one.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Rebecca, can you help me?
Well, I can take my best guess, which may be way off, but if I recall correctly, in that passage in Genesis, Rebecca is upset because her older son, Esau, I think married 2 Hittite wives.
Right.
So she's upset because she has 2 Hittite daughters-in-law in her house. So maybe the metaphor is that just as Rebecca is upset having these foreign women with their foreign ways moving into her house and messing everything up, maybe the metaphor is that here Israel is like the foreign daughter-in-law, and they're going to move. It's like having, and having them move into land would be like having, they're the foreigners moving into her house and messing everything up. So I don't know. That's my best guess at it.
That's really good because it is pointing me to the place where ultimately I want to take this discussion about how easy it is to turn these people who are different into others and into the objects of oppression. And so yeah, like Rebecca, who said, I don't like having these infiltrators in my house. That's a connection to what Balak is saying. I don't like these infiltrators in our region, this whole nation of them. That's really interesting. Okay, thank you for that. Um, we're going to come back to it in a roundabout way. In the meantime, I just want to show you one other thing on our way to get to this point, a point that I'm real excited to make. There's one other subtlety that I want to point out on the source sheet here. I already asked this question. The story begins with Balak ben Zippor saw that all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And then a paragraph later, he's like reintroduced. Balak, son of Zippor, who was the king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Bilam. Um, why, why is he reintroduced in this paragraph a few sentences later? And what new information does it add? It adds that oh, by the way, he was the king. Why didn't the text, we're trained to read Torah that the language is concise. It doesn't take three words if two would have sufficed. So how come at the beginning of the story it didn't just say King Balak of Moab saw all that Israel had done? Why introduce this kind of essential fact later in the story? Susan.
What I noticed was immediately in 3, Moab was alarmed and Moab dreaded the Israelites. Um, so
Yeah,
you have to think for a minute, is this the whole country? Is this the king? Oh, it can't be the king because he's got another name, Balak, son of Zippor. He's king of Moab. So he's reacting to what the people are saying. God forbid your king would be alarmed and dread things.
right.
He's stronger than the rest of us. That's what
So
I see.
picking up on that, here's a great comment that's not obvious. It's definitely in the realm of Midrash. Okay. This particular Midrash comes from 19th century Russia, from Reb Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk, who says this. This is such a great comment. It starts with he's called Balak, and only a couple sentences later is he called King Balak. Knowing that, he says that's a great opportunity for Midrash to say, oh, there's something that transpired in between. Why isn't Balak called the king of Moab when he's first mentioned in the Parsha? Because at the outset, at the beginning, he wasn't a king. He was just a commoner at the beginning of the story. But he was able to unite his people by inciting them against Israel. When he says, there's a people that came out of Egypt. Now this horde is going to lick us clean, and so on. And because of what he said, they chose to make him their king. Thus, by the second time he's mentioned, he has become king of Moab at that time, and not beforehand. Did you notice that seemingly superfluous phrase? He was the king of Moab at that time. Well, a good midrash picks up on a phrase like that and says, oh, that means the previous time he wasn't the king yet. He must have become king because of the way he used this racist language to rally the people against a common enemy. Does that ever happen in the world? People become powerful because they're able to unite their people against a common enemy? What an amazing insight, I think. Something that happens all the time. And look at and just to say this is the use of a wonderful midrash. Just to review it again. At the beginning, he's just called Balak. A few sentences later, he's become King Balak. The midrash says King Balak at that time and not at the previous time. So the midrash fills in the blanks and said it must be because of what happened in between that they said, you can be our king because you've identified a common enemy and you're going to save us from them. thus the story of tyrants throughout human history. Evelyn, great midrash.
I'm just thinking it's like I don't think it's exactly parallel, but with Jacob being called Jacob and then later becoming Israel, like just Jacob as the family and then becoming the Israel, representing Israel.
I'm not sure I understand why. Oh, you're wondering why Balak becomes Moab itself, right? That's what you're saying.
I'm just saying there's a parallel there. So
Yeah.
it's not so far-fetched.
Okay. I mean, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Um, okay. Now we've got a little bit of momentum about what's happening here. So now there's a couple of other really interesting things I have in our remaining time together on this source sheet. Speaking of Abraham and Jacob and the stories in Genesis that Andy has pointed us towards and Evelyn just pointed us towards, the message to Bilam is, I know that, let's share it again. The message is, put a curse upon this people, since they're too numerous for me. I know whom you bless is blessed indeed, and whom you curse is cursed. Andy pointed us to this before. It sounds just like God calling Abraham back in Genesis chapter 12, when God says to Abraham, go forth from your native land, from your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and so on. And then verse 3, Avaracha mivarakecha mikalelcha aor. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. Here's what I think is so exciting about this, that it sets up the conflict so perfectly, knowing that the Israelites have this blessing of Abraham. Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. But about Bilam, it said, whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. So Bilam has this power that his blessings and curses work. And the Israelites have this protection. And both of these things come from God, Balaam's power and Israel's protection. So, what's going to happen when the two of these things square off against one another? That's what this story is about. So that's why Andy was correct in hearing this allusion to Genesis, because that's where all the tension in this story lies. Who's going to win? Balaam has this God-given power. Israel has this God-given protection. What's going to happen when they square off against one another? And that's the dramatic tension of this story. Cool, right? So suddenly but the author of this story is able to subtly connect it to the Exodus from Egypt in the racist language that he uses, and also back to Genesis, to the stories of Jacob, like Evelyn pointed out, to the stories of Rebecca, like the Rashbam pointed out, and to Abraham himself, like Andy pointed out. All of this stuff is kind of in this mix, but some of it in a very subtle way, or you have to be able to hear the allusions to what came before. Now, here's one more wondrous thing that I want to share with you before I'm all done with my what I prepared for you. I've got two comments on the page here. I'm going to skip over Richard Friedman's comment here, although it's really good. I hope you take my source sheets and look at them after we're done. But I want to get to this 19th century comment from an interesting from a very interesting figure of a early 19th century rabbi from Poland who ultimately made his way to Eretz Yisrael. You can go visit his grave on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. He has an astounding comment. He's going to ask a question that, as far as I know, nobody else asked before him about this story. So Balak, we've already established, is afraid. He rallies his people to be afraid of the Israelites. He even brings in some of the neighbors. We didn't talk about the Midianites. What are they doing there? Rashi says that it's simply what it sounds like. In his fear of the Israelites, he brings in some of the neighbors to be part of this coalition against them as well. Oh, but there's another comment about Midian is not random either, because you remember Midian was the place that Moses ran to when early in his story when he killed the Egyptian. So there is a midrash that says the reason why King Balak went to the Midianites is because they knew how Moses thought, because he was one of them for a long time. So he said, I'm going to go to the Midianites and see if they can tell me how this Moses character thinks, and we'll use it against him. But anyway, all of that. So what is the story hinges on the idea that because of all of this, King Balak hires this foreign prophet whose fame is worldwide. We saw it on the archaeological inscriptions. Everyone knew who the prophet Bilam was, and that when he curses somebody, they stay cursed. And when he blesses somebody, they get blessed. So he's hiring him to go curse the Israelites. Everybody got that, right? Here comes Rabbi Zilberberg's comment, and he asks a wonderful question. You ready? Look at this question. Why did Balak hire him to curse Israel? Wouldn't it have made more sense for him to bless Moab and then he could go and defeat them? Isn't that an astounding question? Do you get the question? That I've got this nuclear option, this prophet whose words always come true. So I could say, curse my enemies, or I could say, bless me and my people, so that we'll be safe and prosperous and strong. Why choose to curse the enemy instead of to bless your own people? Everybody get the question? Now we can read the answer. From here we see something about the true nature of anti-Semites, says the commentary. They do what they do, not for the good of their own people, but rather out of their hatred for Israel. Balak was so consumed by hatred that he forgot about his own people's needs and can only think about hurting his enemy. From this great hatred, they end up condemning themselves and bringing destruction upon their own people and land. I do think this is the story of anti-Semitism, but I think it's the story of hate writ large also. This story is telling the story of Israel and its encounters with hatred. But there's a universal dimension to this story, too. This is the nature of hatred and of demagogues throughout history. Let's curse our enemies at the expense of the well-being of our own people. And that's a sorry story throughout human history, but a tragically common one. And I think this insight is so astonishing to ask a story that read over and over again so many times, to come across a comment like this that totally inverts it on its head, to say, why curse them rather than saying, hey, bless us? And there it is. He gets the nature of anti-Semitism and hate writ large, period. It's always about the hate more than it's about our own well-being. That's what I've got to say today, and I'm eager to hear your responses. Ronnie, you're still muted. Still muted, Ronnie. We can't hear you. I'm going to come back to you. Let's go to Marcia, and we'll come back to you, Ronnie. Marcia.
Isn't that the story of Hamas? It's
Among other things, yes.
Hatred of Israel has wreaked horrible.
That's certainly one reason why I was eager to share it with you. but um, but it's bigger than that as well. And you can also turn it inward and say, have I ever made that mistake too? In my hate, I've expressed I've expressed myself in ways that damaged myself. I mean, yeah, I'm not comparing you or me to Hamas, but it's easy to direct this outward and then to say, but have I ever, damaged myself or my family or my world with this same syndrome? Is the question I want you to take away from. Ronnie, did you do it? Yeah, you did. Go ahead, Ronnie.
Okay. So what occurs to me is that it brings back our old question is why are we so hated? What have we done as a people to incur such hate through all the generations?
Yep. I'm going to leave it as a rhetorical question because if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a much better rabbi. But um, but that is an eternal question, I suppose. Evelyn,
A couple thoughts. I was thinking of comparing, when you were talking about demagogue, I was thinking of comparing Moses and Balak.
go ahead.
Even though Moses isn't mentioned in the story, there's kind of just a contrast.
What is spell it out? What's the contrast?
The contrast that he doesn't seem to be so fear-based.
Mhm.
Just
That's a good
cursing
place to
another
start.
people because he thinks that we're going to be destroyed. He's like it's said in a way in what that last comment said that he's thinking about the good of the people and
Mhm.
bringing them to the land of Israel.
Mm.
And I'm saying that's to me what a good leader is. And I think he embodies that.
I like that approach of
And I just
contrasting.
wanted to say something about hatred because I think it's um I have to say being in the West Bank a couple months ago, 3 months ago, I have to say we all have that. Like just like you were saying, we as a people, after what happened October 7th, we have to ask ourselves how much hate consumed us afterwards. So I think in that way, I think we need to be honest, and I think we need to do a little soul searching in terms of how much damage did we
I
do.
don't I don't know if I agree with your analysis as far as that goes, but spiritually, I totally agree with you. You heard me say that it's easy to turn a lesson like this outward. It's always worthwhile to turn a lesson like this inward and say, have I also done damage with this same kind of error? Yeah. Thanks for saying it, Evelyn. Thanks for being on the same wavelength as me. Judy.
Thank you. This relates a little to Evelyn's comment, and I think the previous one as well. Just what I think about is the role of fear, and that's for another time to explore. But I find that that's a compelling idea. It's like the role of fear in the hatred and all that. So um, that's just what I was thinking about.
Great. Thank you. Such universal themes coming out of this very kind of specific story. Last word for today goes to Gershon. Go ahead.
Too late.
I see you, Barbara. We'll bring you in too. Gershon, go ahead.
Okay. Just to go back, so I don't disagree with anything I've heard here, and I certainly am sensitive to anti-Semitic issues that have gone on throughout our history. I just add one extra perspective to this, and maybe a little warning for us. In this story, Balak is first of all has heard what our own story says we had done before that,
Mm.
and sees us moving in a large mass of people in his direction. And so, in that sense, fear is not totally unwarranted, not necessarily knowing what we intend to do, but it's a question of where you happen to sit in the story, whether
Mhm.
you see the Jewish people just trying to achieve their destiny, or whether you see the Jewish people coming at you, basically. And so maybe it's also partially a lesson to be aware of how we appear to others.
Yeah, that's sure. That's always valid too, and it casts an interesting light still on that last commentary too. When you take that fear, does it transform into um, cursing the other or reinforcing your own strength and blessing? Right?
Yeah, fortification.
Which direction does that energy go? Does it get destructively outward or constructively pulled inward?
Great.
Barbara, you get the last word.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll be really quick. But many times during this conversation, I was thinking about the spies, the 10 spies who were full of fear for these giants. But Joshua believed in God and knew that God would help him. And so he overcame that and looked at what was good in the land. But it was his love of God that propelled him to do that. So,
I like that too, because and it also in the spirit of full circle. The opening word was vayar, to see. What is it
mm,
that you see? Do you see a world
exactly.
for maybe this is one of the ultimate lessons of this whole section of do
Hmm.
you see the world and want to curse it and destroy it? Or do you see the world and want to use it for bringing more of God's blessings into the world?
Mm.
And that's the juxtaposition of curse and blessing is something that we're going to explore together for the next few weeks because that's kind of the one of the big themes of this whole unit. Thanks everybody for being with me today. It's great to be back with you all. I hope you like this. We're off to a good start. The whole section gets wilder and wackier as we go on. We'll pick up with verse 7 when we're together next week. Keep coming back, okay?
Okay.
Thank
Thanks
Thank you
you.
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Shabbat, early
Bye.
Shabbat Shalom.
Early Shabbat Shalom to you too.